Bill. We appreciate your prayer, your past prayers, your continued supports of Dreamers and all immigrants and refugees and people seeking safety in the United States. Thank you for your leadership within the USCCB.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, everyone. We're now going to go ahead then and get into the webinar. The presenters today are Alyssa Mira with the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, and Jose Cabrera with Ignatius Solidarity Network, and my colleague Ashley Feasley, who is the Director of Policy at Migration and Refugee Services. A couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is muted right now, so what I'm going to ask is, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. If possible, please say who you are and where you're participating from. And then a recording of this will be made available later on. It'll take us a couple of days to get it on the JFI website, but rest assured that we are recording this webinar for you and for all other folks who are going to be interested in replaying it in the future. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead then and turn it over to Alyssa. Alyssa, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm very happy to be joining everybody today. So I just wanted to start by going through a quick timeline of DACA. I know many of you are already familiar with the program. It was created by the Obama administration on June 15, 2012, and its purpose was to allow young people who were brought to the country illegally by their parents to request temporary protection from removal and to receive work authorization that would allow them to live and work in the U.S. lawfully without the fear of deportation. Deferred action is not considered a lawful status, so it's simply an exercise of prosecutorial discretion, which means that DHS has determined that a person who could be removed is actually a low priority for deportation, and so they're allowed to remain in the U.S. lawfully. And as I'm sure you all know, it's not permanent. It's not something that offers a pathway to citizenship. Currently, there are about 700,000 people who have DACA. They're people who've grown up in the United States. They have families here. They're parents to U.S. citizen children. And so this touches many people who are part of our communities. So how did we get here to the topic of today's conversation? Well, after making it a campaign promise to shut down DACA while he was running for the presidency, Trump and his administration finally attempted to end DACA on September 5th, 2017. The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, issued a memo by then acting DHS Secretary Elaine Duke, and the memo cited various reasons for ending DACA, primarily that in the Attorney General's view, the DACA program was illegal. And so this memo rescinding DACA, it allowed a one-time renewal for some DACA recipients, and it kicked off legal challenges to the rescission. So there were numerous challenges, lawsuits were filed, and multiple district courts issued preliminary injunctions, which kept DACA renewals in place while the litigation continued. And so DACA recipients and Dreamers were again plunged into this limbo, uncertain about what would happen with the program. So after years of watching this play out and waiting for a decision, the Supreme Court finally weighed in yesterday. They ruled that the administration's attempt to rescind DACA was invalid because it didn't follow the procedures that law requires. And so for now, DACA remains in place. And so let's go to the next slide. We'll take a closer look at what the Supreme Court decision said. There were two issues that were before the court. So number one, the primary issue they had to first address was whether the Department of Homeland Security's decision to end the DACA policy was judicially reviewable. And then the second issue was then whether the Department of Homeland Security's decision to end DACA was lawful. Did they go through the proper procedures in deciding to end the program? So in yesterday's decision, it was a 5-4 decision authored by Chief Justice John Roberts. The Supreme Court ruled that the decision to rescind DACA was unlawful, and it vacated the memo rescinding DACA. So we'll talk about what that means. The ruling held that federal courts did have the jurisdiction to review the decision to end DACA. The court rejected the government's argument that the agency, that DHS, had sole discretion in ending the policy. And the court held that DACA is more than a policy, just not to enforce immigration laws against a group of people. It's a program for conferring affirmative immigration relief. And so for that reason, creating the program, rescinding the program, those types of decisions are subject to judicial review. Now, the court didn't address whether DACA itself is unlawful. So it didn't comment on whether or not DACA is a good policy or a bad policy. It simply held that the procedure that DHS followed when they decided to end the DACA program was unlawful because they didn't consider some key questions. So first, the administration didn't consider whether all parts of the DACA program had to be ended. So as I was describing earlier, DACA really has 2 parts to it. It's the decision to defer deportation and allow someone to remain in the U.S., but it's also the other part of it would be granting work authorization and Social Security, so other types of benefits. And the court held that DHS didn't fully consider whether they could have kept part of the program. They could have, for example, retained the deferred action part and just eliminated the associated benefits, but that's not something they even weighed. The other issue that the Duke memo failed to address was whether there was legitimate reliance on the DACA program. So DHS didn't consider the interests of 700,000 DACA recipients who, since 2012, have come to rely on that policy. They've gone on to enroll in degree programs. They've started careers. They've started businesses. They've purchased homes. They've begun families, all in reliance on that policy, and then they would be able to stay in the United States. DHS also didn't consider the consequences for employers and institutions and, the effect that terminating DACA would have on the economy. And so in their ruling, the court said those issues are not necessarily dispositive. They don't necessarily mean that DACA should be kept in place or should not be kept in place, but at the minimum, the agency should have an obligation to consider those issues and weigh them against other policy concerns and interests. And because the agency failed to do that, the court found that their decision was arbitrary and capricious. So it was an unfair decision, and it was in violation of the law. So there's one other piece of this that I'll just note. You might be aware that after that initial memo rescinding DACA was announced, the acting secretary was then replaced by Secretary Nielsen, who issued a second memo that provided some additional justification for rescinding DACA after the fact. And the court did determine that it should not even consider that second memo. It said in the ruling, an agency must defend its actions based on reasons it gave when it acted. This is not the case for cutting corners to allow DHS to rely upon reasons absent from its original decision. So the agency has to stand by the original reasons it put forth in terminating, trying to rescind DACA, and they're not able to provide additional justification after the fact. So as a result of the decision, all of the 3 underlying DACA cases are remanded to the lower courts, and DHS now has an opportunity to reconsider their next move. So what does this all mean for DACA recipients and dreamers? Let's take a look at the next slide. The great news, actually I have another slide. That's the one, thank you. The good news that we have is that the DACA policy lives on for now, right? So current DACA recipients remain protected from deportation. They're still eligible for work authorization and other benefits they've qualified for with DACA. So if you're somebody who currently has DACA, you get to keep that until it expires. The DACA renewal process itself is unchanged. So DACA recipients who have been holding off on filing a renewal can go forward now. They can renew for another 2 years. The confidentiality policies that are in place to protect DACA recipients' information from being affirmatively sent to ICE, those policies are still in place and unchanged. The big question now is what happens with initial applications. So we believe that the Supreme Court decision means that the original DACA policy should be reinstated, meaning people who have never before had DACA will have the opportunity now to file an initial application. And one of the requirements for applying for DACA, we won't go through all the requirements, but one is that the requester must be at least 15 years old at the time of filing. And I believe there's some estimates from the Migration Policy Institute that since the initial application process was halted, there are now about 66,000 DACA eligible children who have turned 15 and are now aged into the program and they're now able to apply for DACA. So that's a lot of people who can potentially now receive the benefits that come along with DACA. So what we're waiting to find out now is how DHS is going to respond to the Supreme Court decision. There's not a clear timeline as to when we get more information. There's likely to be some kind of a delay before they actually open up the process and provide instructions for people how they can submit a request, if they can submit a request. So for now, we're recommending that people hold off on filing any first-time applications and wait for some additional guidance. Along with the prospect of the initial DACA applications resuming, it's possible that DACA recipients could also be able to apply for advanced parole again. And advanced parole is something that allows DACA recipients to be able to legally re-enter the U.S. after travel abroad. We believe that that's something that should be available according to the Supreme Court decision. There are some complications because, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic right now, and that's a serious issue that would limit the ability for many people to travel. So that's another issue where we are going to be waiting for some additional guidance to see what happens. Next slide, please. So while we're waiting, there's another slide on what does this mean for Dreamers. While we're waiting for additional guidance, Dreamers who have never had DACA but are now interested in applying, they can start getting prepared. So it's really important to consult with a legal expert before filing for DACA or advanced parole. It's very, very important to fully understand the risks and the benefits of applying. Today, the enforcement landscape is a lot different from what it looked like when DACA was first implemented in 2012. We know that DACA is not permanent, and so it is a really good idea to get reliable information from an expert about questions regarding eligibility and the risks that might be involved in applying for DACA. The process for filing initial DACA applications is quite involved. So among other requirements, applicants have to show that they've continuously resided in the United States since June 15, 2007 up until the present. So that's over a decade now, right? There's a lot of proof that people are going to need to gather to show that they're eligible. They're going to have to show that they came to the U.S. prior to the age of 16. If they've had prior contacts with law enforcement, they're going to want to get those records. So while we're waiting to see the application process open to initial applicants, that's something that people can start preparing now. They can start gathering documents and getting ready to file. And finally, it's always a good idea to get screened for other types of immigration benefits that are going to offer more permanent relief. So that's true for those who currently have DACA, and that also, of course, applies to people who are going to be planning on applying for DACA for the very first time. Even if somebody has been screened in the past, there may have been changes in their own personal circumstances. There may have been changes in the law, which mean that they could now be eligible for something that's more permanent than DACA. So, for example, family-based immigration could be an option. Maybe somebody is married to a U.S. citizen now, and they're now able to file a petition for them. Maybe they there is an existing petition for them that was filed by a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident parent, and that priority date could become close to becoming current. So those are all important things to look for. Asylum could be an option for some DACA recipients, even if it's been many years since they first entered the country. If there are some changed circumstances, that could potentially open the asylum door for them. People who are in removal proceedings could potentially qualify for cancellation of removal for non-lawful permanent residents. So those are all possibilities that you could be screened for if you talk to a legal expert. So we're encouraging everybody to do that, to get more information and counseling about DACA and about other options. So some quick takeaways before I pass this on to the next speaker, but I wanted to acknowledge there really is a lot to celebrate with this decision. This court, preserving DACA is saving a lot of people and a lot of families from unnecessary suffering, but this is a temporary victory. DACA has always been temporary, and it's still under threat. And really the only way to have a solution to this problem is for Congress to act. And I know you're going to be hearing more about that in this webinar. The court did not address whether DACA as a policy is legal. They didn't say that the administration could never shut down DACA. Instead, what the court did is they bounced this case back to the Department of Homeland Security to reconsider, and they also kind of spelled out what the agency needs to do to properly rescind DACA. So DHS could come back with a new memo showing that they've considered the points that were raised by the Supreme Court, and this time they have a guide as to how to provide an adequate explanation and how to rescind the program properly. Given the track record of this administration and the comments that have recently come from Acting Secretary Wolf and Acting Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli, as well as some comments from Trump earlier today, it seems very likely that they are going to continue to fight and to try and terminate DACA. So some of these quotes that have come out, called, said that the program was created out of thin air and was implemented illegally, that the Supreme Court's decision was an affront to the rule of law. Trump has said that he wants to, file enhanced papers. I assume that means that he wants to file a new memo to try and terminate the program, so it's definitely still under threat. There's a couple of ways that DHS could try to rescind DACA at this point. The surest way of doing that would be to issue a regulation that would go through notice and comment to try and terminate the program. That's something that would take quite a lot of time, months, maybe years to complete. Another option would be just to issue an entirely new rescission memo that would provide rationale for the rescission that would satisfy the Supreme Court. And then obviously if that would happen, there's a potential for more litigation to challenge that. So ultimately, we don't know what DHS will do. There are political considerations for the administration in terms of what steps they're going to want to take to end the program that has a lot of support. We're also, leading up to the time before an election, but that is definitely a possibility. So for now, we need to wait to see what the administration is going to do to comply with the Supreme Court order, with the Supreme Court decision, if they will reopen the initial application process, which we believe that they're required to do, and what efforts they're going to undertake to continue to try to rescind DACA. So the important takeaway is that the job's not done. For people who are hoping that they can apply for DACA for the very first time, make sure that you get screening and that you get some counseling so that you understand what your options are going forward and what the risks and benefits will be. All right, so with that, I think I can pass things on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you very much. Great presentation, and I think we might have some questions for you later. So we'll get to that question and answer period later on in the webinar. Folks, presenting next is our JFI colleague. He is with a Justice for Immigrants core member organization, and he's going to provide a testimony and a personal story about his own DACA experience. And Presenting now is Jose Cabrera with the Ignition Solidarity Network, and there's Jose right there. Go ahead, Jose.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Alyssa, for those insightful and kind of understanding of where we're at right now. I also want to thank Ashley and Bishop Dorsworth for inviting me and being a part of this. I was born on a dirt floor. I lived in a small shack with aluminum walls and aluminum roof. No running water, no electricity, a bed, and a bucket. My mom didn't want this for me. She wanted me to get an education so one day I could be a somebody. At the age of 4, she decided to bring me to the U.S. You see, we were too poor to apply or to be eligible for any visa to come to this country, so we had to enter without inspection. Meaning, we didn't ask permission or tell the U.S. government that we were coming in. We just came in. When we got to the U.S., my mom did everything she needed to do to make sure that I went to school and made sure that I had everything I needed to begin my journey into becoming a somebody. No one really told us what the realities of living in this country, of being undocumented, was like. We weren't expecting the racism, the xenophobia that we would experience. And I wasn't expecting I would have to learn a whole new language. I would be in a strange land that looked so different from my small little village in Oaxaca, Mexico. As the years went on, we found ways to adapt, to overcome our obstacles. My mom was able to get a job where she cleaned houses for a living, and in the evenings she would bus tables at different restaurants. I slowly began to master the language of English and began to learn and how to be a normal American boy growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio. When I was a very young boy in middle school, I had a teacher who one day told my mom that she believed I had a learning disability and that I needed to be tested to see if I needed to change schools to ensure that I had all the proper resources needed to begin learning. For an undocumented Mexican woman who got far as a 6th grade education in a small village in Mexico, my mom, all she heard was, "My son is stupid and will never be able to learn." In that very moment, my mom's world, her dreams, the struggles that she went through coming to this country, adapting and putting all her work so I can get an education, were destroyed right at that moment. Throughout my life, people kept telling me that I would never amount to much, that because of my learning disability, that I would never get far in my education. And then as I got older, I understood what it really meant to be undocumented. I understood that even if I pulled off some miracle and was able to go to a university, that I would never be able to work in a job in the field that I studied. But everything changed when I met a young woman. Her name was Fabiola Arta. We were at a rally, and it was a rally where we were protesting for the current senator in Ohio at the time to support the DREAM Act, the current version of the DREAM Act that was current at that time. I believe it was in 2010 or 2009. I remember standing behind Fabiola as she spoke, and she told her story about being an undocumented immigrant from Mexico attending Xavier University. She talked about everyone in her community, everyone in her family, always laughed at her and said that she was dumb to go out and pursue an education, which when at the end of the day, she would have to clean houses and work under the table just like her parents. So Fabiola said that, I remember Fabiola saying, we didn't come to this country to not move forward. I might be undocumented today, but it doesn't matter. I have a dream and I'm going to keep fighting and working towards my dream. And that's why we need the Dream Act today. Fabiola's story inspired me to work harder in school. She inspired me to believe in myself. And with that motivation, I entered high school with the same kind of reputation as a kid who would never amount to anything. I couldn't read or write in English, and I could barely do math. I worked hard, and by the time I graduated high school, I had a 3.6 GPA. I was the first honors all through my 4 years, and I was accepted to Xavier University, same school as Fabiola. And because of my academic achievements and all the obstacles I've overcame within 4 years, I got so many academic scholarships from Xavier and outside scholarships that allowed me to pretty much be on a full ride to Xavier. But all of those scholarships wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have DACA. Because DACA opened the doors for more scholarships that I could apply to, and it also gave me a job that I could work every the summer before college and make enough money that would last me for the rest of the 4 years. You see, I was working at a mechanic shop, and I was changing engines almost every day. Because of DACA, I was able to, when I was in college, I was able to get a job at a local organization in Cincinnati, Ohio, called the Entertainment Justice and Peace Center, where I was able to start a group called Yes to Educating Society. It was a group for undocumented students, undocumented high school and college age students, their allies, mixed status students, to work and fight for the rights of immigrants in our city, and as well as help folks in our city of Cincinnati understand why we needed a DREAM Act to be passed by the Senate. But more importantly, we talked about the need of needing a comprehensive immigration reform bill that will address our broken immigration system. I fell in love with organizing, and I fell in love with advocating for my community. After graduating, I moved to D.C. for a year and worked at Network Lobbying in their associate program. Those 11 months of my time in D.C., I spent in the background learning about our legislative system, and I saw from my very own eyes the creation of the American Dream and Promise Act, or H.R. 6, that would give a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, undocumented youth, and TPS holders. And on the last day that I was living in D.C. was the same day that the House passed H.R. 6. Today, now, I spend my days working in the Jesuit network, organizing the Jesuit network to advocate for immigrants, to uplift the stories of immigrants in our own network, but more importantly, to do our part in fighting for a humane, comprehensive immigration reform bill that would give a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented folks that live in the U.S. Yesterday was a weird day for me, I'll be honest. I was not expecting this result. For what it almost seems is a year, We have been preparing for negative results. And yesterday, we had a good problem. And that good problem was we have to change all of our messaging to address that we won. The Supreme Court sided on our side, stood on the side of justice. And last night, for the first time since 2017, I was able to sleep knowing that I would never have to see my friends get deported, and I would never have to face deportation. But I know in my core that this isn't enough, that the fight is not over. This is DACA was always meant to be a temporary fix. And it's now more than ever when we have to push Senate to give us a clean DREAM Act that would give a pathway to citizenship for all DACA recipients and undocumented youth. And more importantly, any of those packages that would protect DACA recipients and give them a pathway to citizenship will not put in jeopardy or throw our fellow undocumented siblings under the bus. Together, we have to keep fighting and we have to keep working because we have to give a pathway to citizenship, not just for DACA recipients, for the 11 million undocumented folks that are living in this country. And we have to start working, doing the hard work of addressing our broken immigration system because it's long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Very moving story. We appreciate you sharing it. And an old friend, Consuelo Key from the Diocese of Raleigh, thanks you. This captures all of the comments that I've been reading. Thank you for being the voice of all the immigrants. It takes great courage to migrate to a foreign country to become a better person. Congratulate your mother too, please. So thank you very much, Jose. Folks, I want to go ahead now and turn it over to my colleague Ashley Feasley to go into what happens next. So Ashley, go ahead, please.
Thanks so much. I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to speak pretty quickly for a couple.
Ashley, you faded out.
A number of questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
Okay. But first, I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of our speakers who just did amazing jobs. One in explaining about DACA, and then Jose, I think your story, your witness, your leadership in the Justice for Immigrants Coalition with the Ignatian Solidarity Network and with the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is really remarkable. So thank you very much. I think my partners here have made a very good case for kind of the legal nuts and bolts of what DACA is about, and then Jose, of course, gave, I think, most importantly, what's at stake. I think that we need to turn to the politics of this, as the entire DACA program, frankly, has been very politicized recently. I have up just some slides as it relates to the kind of points of decision. Obviously, on June 18th, we had yesterday we had this historic decision. Earlier today, we had the president announce that he'll alter or attempt to end the program. He used the word enhanced papers. I don't think anybody really knows what that means immediately, but there is a signaled intent, it sounds like, to move forward. Alyssa really clearly pointed out that the decision, while preventing the Trump administration from ending the DACA program under the September 2017 effort, does not prevent the Trump administration from going back and trying again. And so while we had a victory, that victory, I think, very much to Jose's point, we do need to continue fighting. And this is why we're asking you, frankly, to look at this timeline and look at the congressional calendar and really dig in and engage with your senators. Bishop Thorsonville, as did Jose, speak about what happened in the House with H.R. 6, which has passed the House. It has a path to citizenship for Dreamers, as well as a path to citizenship for TPS holders. The Senate, we have not seen any action. And I'm putting up just what we are seeing here for the rest of the year as it relates to here in Washington. So we had this announcement today. We will go into August 2020 recess, which starts basically the first kind of calendar day normally of August. And from now until then is a very crucial time for us to engage very seriously with the Senate and encouraging them to move forward with legislation, with a solution that offers permanent protection. I have a couple other points of decision making at where we could see, major changes. One is September 30th. That's when the government has to have its funding worked out for the next year, and frequently there are pieces of policy that are sometimes put onto those bills. Obviously the election year, and then when we head into what's known as lame duck, it's a possibility if the president is not reelected, that there could be legislative action there. But this is our timeline here for making sure that Jose and others, many others, have a chance to have permanent protection and a path to citizenship. And so I think with that in mind, we're going to turn to some of the important messaging that we need to focus on why this is such a vital time. Tony, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So this is a bunch of messaging, and you're going to all get the slides, but I want to highlight a couple things. We talked about the Senate. Today and yesterday's win was certainly a win for DACA and I think for also the larger Dreamer community who's worked so hard for DACA recipients and to bring this issue to the forefront. But it's really not the end of what can be done to protect Dreamers. We have to push Congress to move forward. We have some stats here. These are all going to be available on the website. We have new materials up on the DACA and Dreamer JFI website in English and in Spanish, which Tony will be sending on Monday in our Migration Monday, that highlight all of these points. But what I think is most important here is that we have to be focused on not letting the Senate, frankly, get a pass because it has failed to act on so many important areas of frankly, life-saving protections for our country. We understand that the Senate has COVID-19 relief to deal with. The Senate and the House are currently working on racial justice packages, which are extremely important given what's happened. But this is also extremely important. This is also an issue of life and death, and this is the time to move forward with this. And so, again, we'll send these messaging points, but these are some of the top lines that we're going to be using, and we hope that you use as well. Tony, if you could turn to the next slide. So I think it goes without saying, we had a wonderful kind of discussion by Bishop Dorsendale talking about the importance of this issue to the church. I was very thankful for his and Archbishop Gomez's leadership with the statement of solidarity first and foremost when they spoke yesterday about the decision, about being with the community and accompanying the community. That is first and foremost. And that is really reflected in, our values as Catholics. And these are also points that we will have available for you on the website. And so moving forward, I do want to talk a little bit about, there's been a couple questions in the chat box about President Trump's remarks and how are we supposed to put them into context. Yes, I think anybody who has Twitter saw that President Trump did say, as I mentioned, these extended enhanced papers today. Again, the president had the ability to move forward with canceling the program, and the Supreme Court even says it in the opinion. What's important here is that we focus on, regardless of whether the president does attempt to end the program or not, that we focus on making sure that the Senate feels compelled to act on this during this time. There was a question in the webinar box about what exactly is the procedure and what will happen if the president were to choose to move forward. Well, So the president could choose to move forward, and he could move forward, and following the Administrative Procedures Act, he could promulgate a new rule attempting to end DACA. He could, in theory, just issue a memo as he did last time, but it is more likely that he would be going through the formal administrative procedures process, which requires at least a 30-day notice and comment period. Now, those requirements could be waived, but I think it's important to understand that this second effort, if it does occur to end DACA, would likely immediately be mired in litigation. It likely would face a number of challenges and face, frankly, a number of delays that would likely get us to the election. So this is tying into another question that another one of our JFI members had about whether this issue could be a serious election topic. And the answer is almost definitely yes. This will be an issue. It'll be an issue probably on three fronts. The first is whether the president will choose to act to cancel the program or not. The fact that the Supreme Court did not side with him yesterday means that he now again has to actively choose to end the program or choose not to. So again, it goes back to this issue of whether he needs to move forward to support his base, or whether he moves forward in this moment of extreme kind of pain and disunity in our country and tries to not create more division and pain. And so I think those are the options there. But secondarily, why it's going to be such a big factor in this election is because we are going to be faced with two choices about how we want to treat immigrants in our country who are part of our history. Whether we want to be fighting over the cancellation, preventing DACA recipients like Jose and others whose contributions to our communities and to the work that we're doing is evident, or whether we want to be building something, moving forward with a path to citizenship, moving forward with, frankly, the culture and ethos of our country and of our church. So these are things that certainly will be in play. I do want to give some time for questions, but I'm happy that you all have been on the call, and we will continue to have webinars and updates on this. So, Tony, maybe you can open it up for questions.
Sure, folks. Unfortunately, we are unable to unmute phones, but if you do have questions, please type them in the chat box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen there. Actually, here's a really good question from Sue Weischer in New Orleans. The last time a DACA bill was considered, the president insisted on including funding for the border wall, and some Republicans went along. Any strategy to prevent that from happening?
So first, I'm actually going to let Jose speak first on this, because I think that the DACA community and the Dreamers themselves have very strong opinions about this, and then I will follow up. Jose, you want to go?
Tony, could you just repeat the question one more time for me, please?
Sure, Jose. The last time the DACA bill was seriously considered, the president insisted on including funding for the border wall, and some Republicans went along.
Yeah, that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, so what's the strategy to prevent that from happening again?
We are, since November 12th, when the Supreme Court has been, when the Supreme Court heard the oral arguments for the case, many advocates have been talking to offices in both the House and the Senate and expressing that we do not want any we want a clean DREAM Act that would not harm the rest of our undocumented siblings. We have been very clear, and everyone who's making statements on this, that we're saying we do not want any additions that would harm or jeopardize our family. And most organizations have all agreed. Most organizations have agreed that if any package comes to surface that does have money going to the wall, to ICE and to CBP, or creating more restrictions and making it harder for a pathway to citizenship, that we will reject those packages.
So, Tony, I think it's important to understand that Jose and the Dreamer and DACA-led community do feel that there is a lack of trust from the president and have clearly laid out some red lines as to their asks. And that's really important, I think, to understand some of the contours of the debate. As it relates to the strategy on how to prevent some of this coupling from happening, I think that there are a number of things to consider. One is that the president likely, the Senate likely will need to focus on some must-pass legislation as it relates to the work on police reform and racial justice, and hopefully a COVID-19 package. If you were to see the possibility of Trump try to promulgate a DACA, an immediate ending of DACA through expedited administrative processing, perhaps you could see a fix that could be attached there. But I think the larger issue is, many in the Dreamer community and the TPS community are looking for meaningful legislation that does carry a path to citizenship. And I think it's important to understand that is a clear desire. Another thing also to consider on some of this is as we are going into an election year, the appropriations process, tends to be less controversial because we're right before a presidential election. But as we all know, 2 years ago, there was a literal shutdown of the government over the Department of Homeland Security. So you also could see some possible ideological issues on immigration enforcement funding in that as well. These are all, again, back why I put the calendar and these moments of decision kind of up. We will be needing to monitor this, frankly, into December, depending on how the election goes, and further on, depending on ultimately who is wins the next election. So it is a long road to hoe.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Alyssa, this was asked by Tom Dwyer earlier. Can you explain what it means when a DACA recipient's status expires? What happens then? And how does the Supreme Court decision change that?
Sure. So currently, if a DACA recipient's status expires, they're undocumented. If they don't have any other status, they're undocumented. That means they lose their authorization to work, they lose protection from removal, and if the government chooses, they could place that person into removal proceedings. So those are the stakes if somebody's DACA expires. Now, the decision from the Supreme Court does nothing to change the current renewal process. So if somebody currently has DACA, they can continue to renew it in 2-year increments. If they had DACA in the past and it expired, as long as they are still eligible, they can file now for a renewal. And so that's been left unchanged. Is there something that I'm missing from that question, Tony?
Yeah, no, I think you got it there. I think that's a good explanation, Alyssa. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Ashley, there was another question.
This is Ashley. I see a number of questions about if I have a senator who's already supportive of the Dreamer issue, what can I do to be responsive? So I think that there's a number of things that you can do, candidly. One is I do want to say I think we have some individuals here who are on from the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I have a conversation with them about this almost regularly. They have great relationships with their senators, and Senator Durbin, their senior senator, is very much a leader in this. And they, came up with some super inventive things to do, one of which was to look to sponsor with other dioceses and red states to give them their materials, to encourage them, to help them, to also move forward. Sometimes in dioceses or in circumstances, resources are tight, particularly now in light of all of the things that are affecting our country. I urge, I think I'll have the permission, but I urge you, we will give the point of contact in Chicago, and they have some great ideas. The other thing I'll say to you on this is frankly, I realize that all politics are local, but use your voice, I think, also with other Catholics who need, frankly, an education about what our teaching and our values and our day-to-day work on this is. You may live in a state with a senator who's super involved, but you may be a parishioner with somebody who doesn't agree with you or the church on this issue. That may sound a little kind of hokey to hear, but I think the battle over hearts and minds and rhetoric is really at stake here. I think making sure that we are as Catholics, not giving the appearance that we are dividable on this issue among others is really going to be an important point as well. And the other thing I'll say is, people love to hear thank you. If your senator does a great thing or signs onto a letter, or we ask you, if you could follow up with them and say thanks, please do so. It's not always easy to take a stand on some of these issues, Republican or Democrat alike, and hearing from you, their constituent, it goes a long way.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. This is actually a question I hadn't thought about, and this is from Mary Gore in Alaska. Do you think if we wait to push until after the general election, we might pick up some more Republican GOP votes?
So, Mary, I think you raise a really good question. I think, to be quite honest with you, I think some people think the pressure is off the Senate. I think, frankly, the tweet that the president gave today will actually push more pressure on the Senate because it does seem like the administration is really considering strongly moving forward with promulgating a rule. I'm not a litigator. There could, be legal challenges that last long, or there could be, a way that he attempts to immediately promulgate the rule. There is some debate within the Supreme Court opinion about whether formal notice and comment is needed or whether just the issuance of a memo would be okay. I think first and foremost, this issue has been put on the back burner for too long, for 20 years now. And it took us, frankly, to the brink of losing the entire kind of ability for people like Jose to work and live here and be the leaders that we rely on, that we have to push to keep this moving. I think there'll always be other windows, and I do think, that we'll keep trying. But here is a moment, especially if the president really does double down and attempt to lose it, that, we have a House bill that's passed, and it really is time.
Thank you, Ashley. Just one follow-up, folks. Ashley spoke, and the folks in the Archdiocese of Chicago answered. The email address for our JFI contact in the Archdiocese of Chicago is the last message in your chat box. So go ahead, please, and jot that down if you have any questions as far as advocating with your U.S. senators. They can have some really good answers for you. We're right about towards the end, but I think we have time. We have time for one more question here. There's a question from Eric Pavry. The likely timeline for USCIS reopening the process to accept more applications, days, weeks? Maybe that's a question for Alyssa.
Hi. It's a good question, and unfortunately, we don't really know the answer to that. There is some talk about a DACA case that's ongoing in Texas, where they have an upcoming conference date, and the government will have an opportunity to say what they want to do in that litigation in light of the news from the Supreme Court. And we're thinking at least by that date we will hear something from the government about how they are going to go forward with responding to the Supreme Court decision and hopefully opening up initial applications. So we don't know the answer to that yet. We just need to stay tuned, and we'll certainly share information once we know what the guidelines are going to be.
Very good. Thank you, Alyssa.
So, Alyssa, there's one more question from Abigail Gonzalez. Do you know if there are places where DACA members and/or DACA candidates can have a guide on the process, or should it be through an attorney only? I'm wondering if she's talking about the accredited reps.
Sure. So there are a number of resources on our clinic website. I can post a link to that. We also have a directory of our affiliate organizations who provide direct legal services all around the country. I know that there are numerous organizations that have guides that are targeted towards DACA recipients and dreamers regarding how they can go through the process. Why I would really recommend that people consult with a DOJ accredited rep or an immigration attorney as they go through this process is because it can get complicated. We want to make sure people are getting good advice about how to complete applications, that they have all the evidence that they need. We don't want to see applications being filed and then ultimately denied or rejected because they were not completed properly. We want people to get counseling about the risks in their specific situation. People might not always be aware of, certain issues in their background that might be a problem when it comes time to file an initial application or for a renewal. And as I mentioned earlier, we really want people to get screened for other types of relief. DACA, of course, is temporary, and people may qualify for some other immigration benefit that might be more lasting and provide more benefits to that individual. And so we really recommend that people speak with an expert about their options and get more information about that. But I'll post a link to our clinic website, and that might be a starting place for people who are looking for resources.
So Consuelo has a follow-up question, but I want to just go back to the USCIS very quickly to Eric and Cindy and several others. The Migration and Refugee Services, Bishop Dorsonville, actually submitted a letter to the Hill on USCIS funding priorities. We worked with Clinic to do it, and it'll be in the next week in review, and we are putting it up on the website actually this afternoon. One of the things that we have actually highlighted both with USCIS, Clinic has engaged, and then we have engaged with the White House about this concern about whether there will be resources to help ensure that DACA recipients can continue to move forward and engage with USCIS as needed. So I'm happy to share the letter. It's going to be on the website, and we're still taking recommendations. We worked very hard with Clinic on it. It covers a number of things. And also, you can get it if you sign up or you receive the Week in Review newsletter. So yes, we're aware of it, and we are concerned, particularly if you do see situations, if you're a citizenship grantee and you're seeing delays in that announcement, please get in touch with me. We are working on that. And then Consuelo mentioned about, she just wanted to see if you could mention just briefly, explain the DOJ representative program, Alyssa.
Sure. So DOJ representatives, DOJ accredited representatives are people who are not attorneys, but they are licensed to provide immigration advice. They can represent people before USCIS, and there are also some DOJ accredited reps who can represent people in immigration court. In order to be a DOJ accredited rep, you have to work or volunteer with a nonprofit organization. And you also have to demonstrate that you have the skills to complete immigration applications and to advise people on immigration issues. So Clinic works with organizations that have both immigration attorneys and also DOJ accredited reps. The main thing is we want people to consult with those who are licensed to give advice, who are qualified to give advice. We want to make sure that people are not going to go to notarios or rely on something that, information that's inaccurate. And so we really encourage people to be careful about, the sources that they go to for information.
Great. I want to thank Ashley and Alyssa and Jose for your participation today. We've gone way over the hour, and I really appreciate the folks who've stuck with us. I don't know if he's still on, but Bishop Dorsonville, thank you for inspiring us with your prayer and for joining us. Thank you for your continued leadership. Folks, I want to bring your attention to two final items. I'll leave it up here. It's what you can do. There are links to our JFI pages, how you can sign up for the action alerts, and our DACA resource page. I'm also going to leave up the chat page, the chat box. I'm going to leave it up for 5 minutes. We're going to be able to get your email addresses from the record of this webinar, but if you want these and I don't have your email address already and you want it, I'll make sure that if I see it here in the chat box, I'll put you at the top of the list for receiving the recording of this. So on behalf of my colleagues and the other presenters and Bishop Dorsonville, thank you everybody for your interest. Thank you for your support of DACA recipients. Thank you again, finally, to my co-presenters on this webinar, or the presenters on this webinar, and to Bishop Dorsonville. God bless you all. Please take care of yourselves and your families. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.